Welcome to the Free Marketeers, the official podcast of the Free Market Foundation.
Hello listeners and welcome to another episode of the Free Marketeers. My name is Martin van Staden and I am joined today by Chris Hattingh, a fellow researcher here at the Free Market Foundation. Our usual co-host Piaki Dlamini is not with us today. I think he's taking a little bit of a break. And,
knowing him, Piaki will come back with 5 graphs and all sorts of things for us to look
yes.
at. So.
I'm under no illusions that he's stopped working. I think he's probably working on something data related, but then we look forward to seeing what he brings back for us next week. But this week, obviously, listeners, we're going to talk about some of the bad news that we've been getting from statistics agencies and the Treasury this last week about our dismal economic showing here in South Africa. I think our gross domestic product contracted by something like 3.2%. I don't have the exact figures, but that apparently has just, as all the media houses say, shocked everyone. Are you shocked, Chris?
I was very shocked. I think I might be more shocked than President Ramaphosa.
Oh, yes.
Which is saying a lot because he's shocked at everything under the sun.
Yeah?
No, the funny thing is, I'm not sure which economist or commentator it was, but they pointed out that this contraction, it's the biggest since 2008, obviously, with the financial crisis. And it's almost like, well, not almost, it is like South Africa, the government has caused our own recession. That's the level of contraction. This is what happens in a recession.
Yeah.
And we know it's because of government policies, so we aren't shocked. I'm speaking on your behalf and obviously on the FMF, but I really don't think we're shocked. So.
Yeah, no, it's very bizarre to me that even economists are like, wow, how could this happen?
Came out of nowhere.
And stuff like that. And it's like, guys, we just signed into law the national minimum wage. 15,000 domestic workers all lost their jobs in this first quarter. Our unemployment numbers were adjusted to reflect something like 9.9 million or something. We're quickly approaching 10. And that may even be the conservative amount. I'm not sure, but all I know is that it's probably worse, given the environment that government has created. Now it's going after Airbnb-type businesses, short-term home rentals. These are self-made entrepreneurs that are now going to be forced out of the economy. Any number of things. The government is trying its best to strangle this economy. And of course this contraction shouldn't be shocking to anyone, least of all people who have some level of understanding of how a market works, how an economy works. If we look at the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Index, all the countries where you have high growth are countries where the government does not play an overbearing role in the economy.
So on that note, the issues you pointed out are obviously very important. But then if you think about the constant bailing out of the SOEs, especially Eskom, the effect that must have had on our economy is almost too big to contemplate for us to wrap our heads around in terms of numbers. You wonder, never mind 1% growth, GDP growth. Imagine what our GDP growth would be if the country had a consistent, let me rephrase that, not one consistent supply of electricity, many supplies of electricity, because we want a competition in electricity. But the bigger the share, and Mpiaki would be able to explain this a bit better, but just sort of my rudimentary understanding, the bigger the share of the GDP the government takes, the more its bailouts is going to have an effect on the economy. So the little taxes that it can currently bring in, it has to now spend on bailing out the SOEs. So even if you're opposed to taxation in and of itself, government can spend some of its taxes on good things, and I put that in scare quotes, for example, welfare, building roads, that sort of thing, but it's not even doing that at the moment.
I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that in the year 1990, at least, Eskom was the biggest company in South Africa. So it was a state-owned enterprise, and it was the largest enterprise in the country. I wouldn't be surprised if Eskom is still on the top 10, top 5 list. And I mean, that's a problem, because if that company fails, then it's dragging on the whole economy, and that's what it's been doing. And I'm sure that more or less the same is happening with South African Airways.
Right.
I mean, they're what's the number? I think they're looking for 31 billion rand in a bailout. I was watching today's press briefing by SAA, and they're very casual about it. They're like saying, our turnaround strategy is still ongoing, and we're very optimistic, but we're still waiting for they call it the assistance.
So they're staying on the same turnaround strategy. This is not a new one now, because they're on number 7 now, I think.
No, it's the same one.
Okay.
I'm sure there'll be a new one soon enough when they see this one also doesn't work. As Leon Lowe always says, there's been so many turnaround strategies that he's surprised they're not dizzy from spinning around like that. But yeah, they're very casual about it. They're like, we need 31 billion rand. It's like SAA must exist.
Right, it's a given. No,
it's a law of the universe that says we must stay in operation, even though we're dragging the economy down with us. So yeah, it's worrying, and I mean, bringing up SAA, that's another topic I wanted us to touch on a little bit. They appointed a new CEO today. Her name escapes me, unfortunately, but I think you mentioned before we started, Chris, it's totally irrelevant who they're appointing, who the CEO is. I mean, the board even said, and this was funny to me, like a journalist asked them, is there going to be a merger between South African Express and South African Airways? And the literal board of the company said, that's not a board decision. That's the decision that the shareholder must make. And I mean, that just illustrates how bizarre this thing is about government, this board that's supposedly in the private market. The board controls the company. It makes all the decisions. It's the highest authority. Yet when it comes to these SOEs, it's the shareholder. And when they say the shareholder, they mean none other than Mr. Pravin Gordhan.
Or just government itself, because without, and this came out in Vuyani Yarana, the previous CEO, his resignation last week, which was sort of leaked to the media. I did a podcast on it earlier this week. But he, amongst the things he pointed to for issues and matters resulting in his resignation, one of them was the sort of crosstalk between ministers and politicians, and he doesn't know whom to go to, and he needs this signature and that signature, and he can't. I don't know him personally, obviously, and I'm not going to extol him as a saint. I'm not saying he didn't have his faults, but I also don't want people to assume that he failed, because I think you need to consider the challenges he faced, and I'm sure he tried in his way. He still wanted SAA to exist, obviously, and I have a problem with SAA in and of itself, with the bailouts, that sort of thing. So I'm not, again, I don't want to paint him out to be above all sort of issues, but I think he legitimately tried to turn it around. But it's a system issue. It's a philosophy issue. And going back to what you said, what I mentioned earlier about, before we started, about it not being about who's the CEO, we can appoint whomever we deem the best. And we can appoint Jeff Bezos, and he won't be able to turn around SAA. It's because it's owned by the government. The government doesn't have to play by usual market forces, market rules. They can keep bailing out SAA. The board can go to the government and actually to the taxpayer, because that's where government gets its funds, its wealth in a way. It doesn't generate its own money. It has to go to the taxpayer. And so the board members know they can keep failing, and the government will be there to help them.
Yeah, it's the skin in the game thing. So in a private company, all the shareholders attend shareholders meetings, and if they start seeing, oh my goodness, we're losing money, they always start firing people. They always start ending livelihoods, telling a CEO, listen, you've wasted our money, go away, we don't want to see you again, bye. When it comes to government, all of our skin is in the game, but we don't have that voice. The government, while it talks about public participation, it never comes to us as individual so-called shareholders of SAA asking us, gee, so we're thinking about merging SAA and SA Express. What do you think about that? It's none of that. It's a totally political decision that they make in their little rooms in Pretoria, and they have no skin in the game. So they lose nothing if they do it. They gain nothing if it's successful, and they lose nothing if it's a failure. And that's the problem that permeates all of government. And that's why the private sector is always better. We see that with private airlines. They're far more conservative with their money. They make sure that they make good business decisions, and if they don't, then someone's going to be out of a job.
To tie this back to our first topic, and as you say, this is endemic in government. So for people who are now shocked by the GDP contraction, and who held so much hope in President Ramaphosa and the New Dawn and these sorts of things, I fear that South Africa is becoming very much based on cult of personality, and we base success. And I mean, I know it's not really your area of expertise or interest, but sport as well, we think if we have this new captain or this new person, it's going to fix all the underlying problems.
Yeah.
But it's very much a case of then, okay, so this new guy, this new president, this new political leader, this new sports captain is my guy, and I'm in his tribe.
Yeah.
And then also people won't work together to solve these problems. It becomes very much a tribalistic mentality, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've been seeing that in South Africa. That's why I guess I'm a little bit of optimism came about me with this thing where the president and the Minister of Finance and two ruling party officials went into a very public spat about the Reserve Bank. And I'm like, this is actually what real democracy looks like. You have different parts of government or the political class very publicly saying, listen, we disagree about something and we're engaged in a I don't know, tit for tat type of balancing act here. Nobody's going to get exactly what they want. There's going to be some kind of compromise. And I think the Americans have done this pretty well with their separation of powers. One official says something, the other one says, no, that's nonsense. And there is no real radical change or revolutionary change. And I think that's good. So I would rather not let President Ramaphosa have just total dictatorial power to say, even if he makes good decisions, even if he says privatize SAA, Eskom, if he alone can just take that decision, there's gonna be a problem because it's gonna end badly for us in other respects. So one day he may just decide, or his successor may just decide, okay, we were talking about amending the constitution to provide for expropriation without compensation, but that's taking too long. I think I'm just going to ignore the constitution and expropriate anyway, like what happened in Zimbabwe. They didn't do the amendment, and Mugabe just said, well, so sad.
Do we have something similar to what they have in the States with executive orders? Can our president, with I know maybe that's my rudimentary understanding, but just take his pen and sign whatever legislation he wants? And I know we obviously don't have the House and all of that stuff, but we have Parliament, so can he do the same kind of thing?
To a lesser extent, so we call them proclamations.
Okay.
But
it's very British of us.
Yes, yeah. So we were on the Westminster system, so we do have that, but to a far lesser extent, because our president is basically, when you cut through all the rhetoric, is basically still part of Parliament. Right. So in America, the president is elected on his own merit as an individual. The popular vote, not really, but the Electoral College chooses him as an individual.
So even if he runs for a particular party?
Yes, So he's not chosen as a Republican or a Democrat, but as himself, and that's why the Constitution in America gives the president some powers in his own right. In South Africa, Parliament plays far more of an active role. Right. But that's not to say that we don't have a similar problem. So, me talking about the rule of law again. Yes. Our ministers, specifically the ministers, not the president, get given a lot of so-called regulatory powers in terms of legislation, basically saying, like the new tourism amendment bill to which is going to regulate Airbnb. It says somewhere that the minister may determine norms and standards for thresholds relating to short-term home rentals. Now, this is the word threshold is not defined and determined and
very open-ended.
Yeah, so it basically means the minister may do what he wants. No. He's going to issue a regulation saying that there may not be more than one Airbnb in Pretoria or something ridiculous, and that will be a quote-unquote regulation. Yes. When in fact it's really law because it really affects our rights, our economic rights, and so forth. No. So we do have that problem to an extent, but not with the president specifically, but very much dispersed throughout the executive government. Yeah. So we're not shocked here at the FMF about what South Africa is going now. We're very worried about talks about quantitative easing, the whisper of printing money to pay off Eskom's 500 billion rand. Is it billion?
I think it's a billion now.
Yeah, it's 500 billion rand debt. And I mean, geez, if it were just so easy to print money to pay off your debts, why don't we all do that? Well,
it is easy to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, they can change the mandate of the Reserve Bank right now. It is very easy to do it sort of overnight. Whomever is running the ANC now can snap their fingers and things are going to happen. Yeah. But then what's not so easy is handling the consequences, because they're going to have all South Africans standing in bread lines. They're going to have civil strife, unlike anything we've seen before. That's going to be very, very bad for everyone. And you might think, what's all this technical talk about hyperinflation or changing the mandate of the Reserve Bank? It comes down to this. When the worth of our currency, of the rand, is lessened by printing money, I mean, it's a simple case of supply and demand. When you have more of thing, it becomes less, it becomes
valuable,
not worthless, but the value drops. Then people's money won't go as far as it used to. So you think you're paying a lot for petrol now, you're going to be paying a lot more for it in the future. You're going to be paying a lot more for bread, basic necessities. We know many South Africans rely on staple foods, such as maize and that kind of thing. I mean, farmers won't be able to farm as they used to. Their tractors run on fuel. As much as we want to green everything, that most of it still runs on good old gasoline. So that won't happen. All this technical talk has a very real effect on all South Africans, and especially poorer South Africans. They, I don't think neither you nor I are in the position where we could leave the country, so we're also very much skin in the game. That's why we want to keep the country from going downhill even faster. But poorer South Africans have no prospect of leaving. I mean, unless they seek refuge in another country, but that has its own problems. Where are they going to go? They can't go north of the border because Zimbabwe has pursued socialism, and it's in an absolute... It's been through hell, and there's no real prospect of it changing anytime soon. So for those people, they're going to be stuck here in the bread lines and that kind of thing, and there's just no hope for turning it around. Either that, or we go to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, with our cap in hand, and ask for some sort of assistance, and that then comes with other requirements and restrictions on what the country can do. So if you think, I don't know, it's harsh for the Reserve Bank to want to remain independent, to keep with its mandate of keep protecting the value of the currency. Just think about how harsh it's going to be when the IMF comes in and tells us, you guys need to do X, Y, and Z.
Austerity, we're going to have to cut welfare significantly. They're going to want us to liberate the economy, which we will say is good.
Yes.
But we wouldn't want it to be enforced. We would much rather have South Africans come to the realization that, listen, we need to be more fiscally responsible. We cannot just throw money at things like SAA, like Eskom, the Petro SA, or what else is that? NHI.
Well, I was going to say, if you think Eskom is bad, NHI is massive.
It's... I keep thinking back to this thing about over the next 3 years they're going to need something like 400 million or billion or something. And then when you check that against the money that government is currently getting from taxes, it doesn't even come close. It's like, what are you people talking about? So we want South Africans to come to the realization by themselves that this is not necessary. Otherwise, these decisions will be made for us.
Yes.
The IMF will make them for us. And even if you think we're going to go to China, don't think Chinese loans come without strings attached.
Right.
If we fail to pay back any loan or help from China, we won't have OR Tambo International Airport anymore. We'll have Xi Jinping International Airport. They will literally expropriate vast parts of South Africa to pay back the debt. And I think that's fine, because if they're owed money, that's going to happen.
Right.
So this is not going to be an easy ride. We need to understand that these decisions, these very reckless decisions, are going to all come with consequences. Rather, we need to wake up now and stop doing the silly things that we've been doing for centuries in this country, really.
Well, if government... we pin a lot of things on, let's say, government or the state, but just, it's in those people's hands to take responsibility for this now and take the harsh medicine right now for the sake of saving some things in the future. So if they do these measures now, they can keep forms of welfare. They can keep other things going, which they think are noble ideals, which they want to keep, what they think about lifting poorer people up. They can keep those things in place. If you keep going down the current route, everything is gone.
Yes.
So it's a case of being humble enough to realize that the path you're on isn't working, engaging with people and think tanks, civil society, not thinking that you're, I don't know, a Tsar of South Africa. And just, maybe listening to good ideas and be willing to implement some of them. I don't think either of us expects a free market utopia overnight. That's not our goal anyway. We don't want utopia. We want freedom.
I think government should start listening to people like Tito Mboweni.
Right.
Definitely not a free market hawk or anything like that. Definitely on the left of the economic political spectrum. But at least I think he's someone, and I guess President Ramaphosa to an extent, although he hasn't convinced me yet, who understands, okay, listen, we want all these reckless things. But we're going to have to be a little bit responsible to ensure that we can still get them. So Tito Mboweni reacted almost want to say violently to any talks of nationalizing the Reserve Bank. He said, he tweeted something like, why should we always what's the word he used? Why are we obsessing over the Reserve Bank all the time? It's like, he's like saying, just leave this thing alone, because every time you mention the word Reserve Bank, the value of the rand falls.
Yes.
Everyone in the world holds their breath. It's like, oh my goodness, there goes my South African investments. Stop using the words Reserve Bank. Stop talking about it. Stop thinking about it. Just leave it as it is. It's doing a great job insofar as the statist paradigm goes. It's doing a fine job.
Yeah.
Just leave it alone. So yeah, we should start listening to people like that and really start ignoring the communists. I mean, just for a little while. Just give the economy a minute to breathe.
Right.
You can keep them around maybe in 50 years when the economy has grown by 6% every year. Then sure, we can start talking to the communists again. But let's give the economy a breather.
Yeah. I don't generally like making a pragmatic or consequentialist argument for these things, but you simply have to look at reality as it is now. The rhetoric doesn't match up with reality, so you can't think that you're going to spend your way out of the current hole that you're in, because as I pointed out earlier, the value of your spending will decrease. So it's not going to go as far as you think. So you need to at some point realize this is staring you in the face, and if you don't change things, you can have all the nice talk about everyone will have a house and food and land and whatever else, but the reality is not going to match up.
Yeah, so listeners, just a final thing I thought we should just mention. I don't know if it's going to be a discussion, but I just briefly saw in the news that cannabis growers in Swaziland or Eswatini are now complaining about South Africa legalizing at least the personal production and use of cannabis, weed, marijuana, dagga, and they're saying that is going to cause ruin to their market. And I'm like, is this legal in Swaziland? Has there been a country that is not partaking in this disastrous war on drugs on our border? That's interesting. So yeah, I found that interesting that South Africa taking in the small way steps to liberalize a part of its economy. Now our neighbors are starting to complain about it. Now imagine if the president just said, okay, we're freeing the market in general. I wonder what our neighbors would be saying then. It's like, oh my goodness.
Well, we know that so many people and very many prominent people around the world think that trade is a win-lose game, or even lose-lose. They think if one produces something, then they're not producing it. It's affecting them and their people, because we're all, as you know, if you're born in a country, you're part of this collective, and we're all we all think with the same mind. And what if what happens to one of us affects the rest of us?
Yeah.
But you need to consider that when you buy a product from China or Swaziland or wherever, it's you trading with that person in that country. You're not trading with those countries. Of course, I wish tariffs would disappear and all these restrictions to trade. But I'm not really surprised by their reaction about what's happening in South Africa. Obviously, I hope that this happens. And if their products, the quality of those stand up to scrutiny, they don't need to worry about losing their business. It's going to take the South African people and businesses a long time to catch up to that level. If they've been doing it now for a few years, they'll know the ins and outs and the intricacies and that kind of thing. So they already have a head start.
Yeah.
You shouldn't think of using force or something negative to punish other people for trying to lift themselves up, which is, I'm hoping that they're not intending that kind of thing. I mean, I know they don't really have any control in what happens in South Africa, but they should also, maybe then they can, I'm not saying they should pursue a different course in business or in life, but there's always gaps, there's always opportunities. So if they now realize that South Africans can buy these things locally, which might be cheaper, it might not, you don't know what other costs the government's going to impose on it, they can then sell South Africans something else. There's always, that's the beauty of specialization and globalization.
Yeah, funny enough, the sale of marijuana is not being legalized in South Africa. So what the Swaziland people are actually complaining is about, we are now unable to illegally sell our products in South Africa anymore. So it's quite funny. I feel having this what would be considered a black market industry now coming into public and say, hey, wait a minute, you're undermining our market. It's like, geez, what a time to be alive, I guess. Yeah, all right. I think that's about it. thank you, listeners, for listening to this episode of the Free Marketeers. We haven't done many other independent podcasts this week. I think Chris was the only one. But me and Mpiaki are going to try our level best to start bringing out our own podcasts regularly again. So yeah, thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel. It's the big red button right under this video. Like us on Facebook, that is Free Market Foundation South Africa, or facebook.com/FMFSA. And of course, follow us on Twitter. It is @FMF South Africa, one word. And always visit our website, www.freemarketfoundation.com. Thanks and cheers.